What happens when your best-selling authors, your famous plant-based doctors and experts, and you have a reputation for helping people get well, recover their health, and one day your daughter, your 11-year-old daughter, becomes very ill, probably because of her diet? What do you do?
Some embarrassment, some guilt, some shame around, hey, look what I did to my daughter.
It was extremely humbling.
With our daughter, getting ill and having an autoimmune disease where she had got Crohn's disease. At first, there's like this level of like embarrassment, and for me, I feel embarrassed and like, hey, I'm teaching this stuff, and how my kids, what am I doing here? And then I look at it was hard enough with our daughter not being just being plant based, right, being vegan, that we were lax on things like sugar and oil and processed foods, right? So she could fit in with her friends. There was a need for belonging, but it wasn't meeting needs for health.
The other side of that was, and that to me is also the magic of nonviolent communication and that needs-based consciousness, is what it builds in connection is a huge amount of trust. And so once she got the diagnosis, coming back together as a family and kind of setting our new normal and what goals we're going to, how we're going to move forward, there was an immediate partnership with her, which is why she's successful right now and why the changes that she's seeing, are so dramatic, because she just jumped in.
Hey, Jeff Nelson of Ventures. I'm talking today with a couple of friends of mine who have been leaders in the plant-based health world for a long time, with a long list of towering accomplishments. Of course, I'm talking about the husband-wife team, medical doctor team of Dr. Alona Pulde and Dr. Matthew Lederman. Welcome, guys. Great to have you here.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hi, Jeff.
Yeah. For those who don't know, Matt and Alana have a brand new book out that we're going to discuss today. It's called Wellness to Wonderful: 9 Pillars for Living Healthier, Longer, and with Greater Joy. But before we start, I just want to make sure that people know who you guys are and some of your accomplishment. You've done a lot together, as well as things on your own. Matt, did you have a residency with John McDougall, or you interned? How did that work?
I didn't have an official residency, but I spent many programs with him. We did a lot of work with him, Alona as well, learning from one of the best.
Absolutely. Well, and you guys are in the hit film Forks Over Knives. You've written, 6 or 7 books, New York Times bestsellers. You did the Forks Over Knives plan and the family. You've written books with John Mackey, I know, the founder of Whole Foods, and you were corporate vice president at Whole Foods Market. You helped launch their national medical and wellness centers, and you guys have a lot of training and different skills and sort of different fields. So I guess it makes sense that with this book and what you're doing, you'd go beyond just eat healthy diet habits to explore other aspects of things. The introduction of your book is Why Diet Isn't the Whole Picture. So why isn't diet the whole picture?
Right. So it's a long question. So diet is so important, but we look at the causes of chronic disease, and there's more to the picture than diet. So diet causes, and some of the diseases are off the table if you get your diet in order, right? It's hard to have, type 2 diabetes, and a lot of people, it's hard for them to have heart disease, for example, if you have that really clean diet. On the flip side, there's other issues that affect people. And then there's also the great, so for example, certain chronic pain and fatigue and sleeping issues and mood disorders, certain gastrointestinal disorders, certain autoimmune diseases. So that you can have a really clean diet and they still don't fully heal from all of that. So there's that. And then there's also the general idea of how we think of optimum health, which is being able to walk around and say that life is wonderful. And I've met a lot of people that are really clean, whole foods, plant-based diets, and they're really unhappy. So does that mean they've achieved optimum health? In our book, they haven't. And that's another reason why we put all these pillars together.
Right. And one of the things that we summarize the pillars as using nutrition and lifestyle, that's a really big huge piece for increasing our and improving our health and longevity. But it doesn't necessarily translate to impacting our joy of the life that we're experiencing. And, Matt and I are ever searching for, checking in. How are we doing? What do we want our life to look like? And, Matt mentioned that word wonderful. And that really was a word that stuck, even though we had, pristine diets and regimented exercise and were getting adequate sleep. And we still weren't feeling like life was wonderful. So in kind of thinking through, well, in a world of infinite possibilities, life can be wonderful. How do we get there? And that's what brought us to the 9 pillars that are in Wellness to Wonderful.
And to build on that too, which is really interesting to us, is that there's a lot of people that don't know that the plant-based diets, whole food plant-based diets, are going to heal all these chronic diseases. That's one hurdle. But there's an even more or larger group of people that know a whole foods plant-based diet works and are having trouble eating it, right? Consuming that diet. What we found is that these other pillars affect people's ability to stick with a program. And that's another key piece. So focus on these other pillars affects your nutrition pillar. And the nutrition pillar affects this, the sleep pillar, and that affects the connection pillar, right? And so they're bidirectional and they support each other. That's one more reason that we expanded into the 9 pillars.
Sort of the idea that the sum is bigger than the whole, or the sum of the parts, as the saying goes. So let's talk about these pillars. There's 9 of them. I didn't memorize them, but I mean, I know what they are. And, you talk about getting out of the survival mode. That's one of the early things that you kind of frame this with. Just talk for a minute about the disconnection epidemic.
Yeah. So many of us, and coming out of the pandemic, this has been even greater. But so many of us have lost a connection, not just with others, but with ourselves. And we go through our days checking off boxes, not even really tapping into why am I, I'm going to the gym, I'm eating my broccoli, I'm X, Y, and Z, but do I even like doing any of those things? Do they bring me joy? Do they bring me meaning and purpose? And in that checking off those boxes, we continue to live in this survival mode that's measured by our productivity, our effectiveness, our efficiency, but really lacking that big piece of bringing us meaning and purpose and joy. So the shift, and especially what we talk about in Wellness and Wonderful, is really shifting that currency from this disconnected survival mode epidemic to one of fulfillment and satisfaction and joy and meaning and purpose and connection.
And it's not about, when we talk about wonderful, it's not about being happy all the time. A lot of people are like, oh, wonderful, that's not possible for me. And actually, you can have very unpleasant emotions and life can still be wonderful when you're connected to them and you allow them to flow. Or life can be miserable when you try to suppress them, repress them, or resist them, right? And even wonderful emotions, wonderfully pleasant emotions, can cause suffering if you grasp onto them and try to avoid losing them, right? So that fear of losing. So it's not about having unpleasant emotions or pleasant emotions all the time. It's about that dynamic connection to those emotions and that flow, not only between what's going on inside of you, but between you and other people. And we want to make it clear, and that's one of our job. We have sort of 2 big missions just around connection. One is to help people understand that it's a powerful disconnection or connection. Disconnection is a powerful, independent risk factor for chronic disease. It's pro-inflammatory. It's very, very much harmful to your health. It's not just a nice to have. It affects physical disease outcomes. It affects all sorts of biomarkers that we address with diet, but we also have data showing that it's affected by connection. The other piece is once people believe and understand, just like we had to convince 15, 20 years ago that plant-based diets could reverse disease. Now we have to convince people that connection can also impact disease. And then once we do that, now we have to show them, hey, here's what you can do. And that's where we got trained, in a process called nonviolent communication. And that's a process that we talk about in the book, Wellness to Wonderful, and that we use as a way to help people improve connection, because it's not just about having lots of friends or, going out socially. It's a much deeper process that we can talk about if you want.
Yeah, I just want to right off say here what the pillars are for our listeners so they know what we're talking about here. And they are, in the order that you list them: self, nutrition, activity, play, sleep, family and friends, work, spirituality, natural world. And that's number 9. When someone comes to you, how do you sort of diagnose? Is there one of these pillars that you see more often come up for most people, and someone else, someone has a sleeping problem? Okay. How does that work? Is there one that more people are most disconnected from and need the most attention from?
Well, it's interesting that you asked that, because the regular model, the conventional paradigm, is to go to the doctor and ask the doctor to tell you what needs to happen to fix you. And we're turning that around, and what we're trying to do is help people cultivate the skill to discern inside where their attention needs to go first, and then give them the skill to heal themselves. And it's that process that's going to lead them to maintaining or sustaining a wonderful life for the rest of their lives. Most people are used to being told what to do, and that's how they measure their successes externally, right? We were told we were good kids because our parents said so. We were good students because our teachers gave us good grades. We were good workers because our bosses gave us good bonuses.
But even in the world of nutrition and lifestyle, right? We need to eat kale because kale is the healthiest food. We need to go to the gym to exercise. And it really inhibits our success based on that. I may not like kale, but I like cauliflower and I like broccoli, but it's not as healthy as kale because that's what somebody told me. Or I don't like to exercise at the gym, but I love to go play soccer or basketball at the park. I love to go for walks in nature. But that's not as healthy because somebody told me otherwise.
Or you have to be polite. So don't share what you really want with your partner or your friends or your boss. Stay in this state of artificial harmony, which we show is a pro-inflammatory physiological state. Stay in that state because that's polite. That's what you were taught to do. So all of these things are being told to us, and it's affecting our health. And that's why we have to address all of them. So like you said, where's the place we would start? It's connecting to what's going on inside of them. And through this sort of investigative process that's bi-directional with us and the clients, we get closer. So if you say, hey, I really want to lose weight, that's where we start going in. And we can take you through that process, but it's very much directed by the client with our support navigating, and then we help them build the skills.
So are there studies? Have people actually looked at the inflammatory nature, testing, I don't know, with biomarkers or something like that, somebody's inflammation levels, let's say, versus, and they maybe make a change, or, how is that quantified?
It's really fascinating. So when you go, and there's all different levels at the cellular level, right? All the way, up to how you feel, right? But there's, just to name off a few, right? There's studies showing that suppression of emotion affects your microbiome, right? And not only the numbers, but the type of the bacteria. There's studies that show that a highly empathic, which is a doctor that's connected to you, right? Highly empathic doctor compared to low empathy doctors. The patients who had high empathy doctors had 25% more likely to have a low LDL, 29% better hemoglobin A1, have a low hemoglobin A1C. They did a study of 21,000 diabetics who had high empathy doctors compared to low empathy doctors. The high empathy doctors had patients with 41% lower odds of acute metabolic complications. You can look at, we talk about the polyvagal theory, There's also something called the cell danger response. When you go into a state of threat, right? Our bodies sort of, the physiological states are either threat or we're safe. And when we feel safe, we can connect, we can digest, we can go to sleep. And when we're in high alert or threat state, we're ready to fight. We're mobilized to fight or run, or we shut down and we go numb, right? That's a high alert state, right? When we are in high alert states, there is a physiological shift in the body that causes increased pro-inflammatory cytokines to be released, right? We release adrenaline and cortisol, and there's shifts in blood flow in our body that allow us to fight, but they don't allow us to repair and restore our health. People, when you live in these high alert states, some people that have experienced trauma and haven't worked through the healing are tuned in these to be living in these more high alert states. It's a continuum, right? And they have a harder time getting to safety, but that can be changed. There's something called the cell danger response that happens when the body is perceiving threat. So at the mitochondrial level, this is like an organelle within the cells, right? There's shifts that happen that cause, they're usually trying to fight viruses and invaders, but that can also happen when we're at a social threat. So it's not only physical threats or disease threats, but social and spiritual and psychological threats. The body reacts the same way. And that's the key piece of information. Whether it's a physical threat, a social threat, a spiritual threat, your physiological changes in your body in response to threat are the same.
And that's where that whole survival mode and disconnection come alive, because when we're in that survival mode, when we're in that state of disconnection, we are in that fight or flight mobilized state that is leading to that inflammatory response. We see that as, burning the candle at both ends, chronic stress. All of that becomes a psychological threat. Once upon a time, we had to see the tiger. And when we saw the tiger, that was the threat. We ran away from the tiger. We got to rest, recoup, and reset. Now we can just think of the tiger, or even more, anticipate thinking of the tiger. And it's that same physiological response.
Right. And when you're disconnected from your partner, right, when we talk about feelings and needs and with nonviolent communication, that's a very important consciousness that we help people create. Right. So, and nonviolent communication is something everybody can learn. It's in our book. It's really changed our lives personally, physically, relationship wise, with my partner, with Alona, with the kids. And we're trying to get that out there. It's a really important framework. In fact, Alona is trained in it. I'm one of the only medical doctors certified as a trainer in nonviolent communication. So it's not out there as much as we'd like. But it's so impactful, because once you understand connections and disconnection is harmful to your health, then it's like, well, what do I do? And that's where nonviolent communication comes in.
So how did you get into this? Was it like personally, you guys, how do you discover this and realize it's valuable? Where did this come from? You're working for John Mackey, you're running the Whole Foods health program, and now you're off, doing something entirely different.
Well, similar to the plant-based diet, how we got into it was personally. I tried it on myself to help issues that I was struggling with. And I started having problems with chronic back pain and sciatica when I was eating the fantastically healthy diet. I was exercising the way I was supposed to. I was sleeping the right amount, and I couldn't get rid of this back pain. And I wasn't a surgical candidate because it wasn't a surgical issue. And that's what's interesting about this, that chronic pain is also stimulated by these similar pathways. And there's a really cool study that came out around pain reprocessing, which is something that we incorporate. And it was in JAMA Psychiatry, where they were able to impact people with chronic back pain over a period, on average, coming in with 10 years of chronic back pain. And with relatively few sessions, we're able to get, I think, over 2/3 of the intervention population to become pain-free. And this is people with chronic pain of 10 years on average that wasn't responsive to conventional therapy. And this was after a matter of weeks. And then they were they sustained the changes a year later. So what's interesting about this is that I said, this has got to be crazy. What are you talking about? I got to do this, deal with the, all this. I thought it was woo-woo, and I was tough. I had my 3 emotions, good, bad, and angry. That's where I was, but I said, I'm going to try it, just like I did with the plant-based diet when I ate rice and beans for a week, just to see if I would feel any different. And I couldn't believe my back pain started feeling better. And they described me to a T in the first book that I had read as the person that's a candidate that's likely to have this phenomena going on. So I was a super high alert. That's my big challenge today. I live with intensity. Dr. McDougall told me to call it passion, but we all know it's intensity. And it's, but that is an opportunity for me, because we'll talk later. It's not about being perfect or getting some destination. It's about being aware of these opportunities to balance your 9 pillars.
Very cool. Now, you guys, I know, just to go off this for 1 second, you have a clinic there in Florida, and you have a big online presence. You have a lot of people working for you. But how do people, come to you? What is sort of the intake? This is like a very wide range of ways that problems can present themselves. How do you guys, suss out where to begin with this with a given person?
Yeah, that's one of the things I most enjoy about our practice, is that we have time to spend with our patients to really kind of discover and uncover what is happening. And we wrote about the pillars, and although we show them as an infinity loop, there is an ebb and flow, and they're all interrelated. Really, at the center and the core is the self. And that is the first point of contact. It's reconnecting with your authentic self, so that you even have the awareness around the importance of these pillars for you. So a lot of the initial work is really getting to know the patient, getting them reconnected to that authenticity. And from that, everybody comes with goals. We get a lot of people, because of Forks Over Knives, a lot of people who want to make nutrition and diet changes or want to lose weight. But when you uncover their story, what we learn is, well, I want to lose weight, but I can't sleep because I'm constantly arguing with my partner, and I'm exhausted. And it's like, okay, well, we know that when we don't get adequate sleep, it's going to lead us, for example, to be more disconnected, to be more reactive toward our spouses or partners or at work or with our children, which then again bidirectionally impacts our sleep. We don't sleep enough. We make different and less healthy choices. In fact, it increases our consumption of junk and processed foods when we don't get enough sleep. And so without addressing those pieces as well, it's nearly impossible to get the nutrition and lifestyle honed and optimized.
Interesting. So someone who comes to you guys, they come online, or most of your clients these days through the internet, and they make an appointment and then you have like a Zoom meeting, or how do you see patients?
Yeah. So they would go to weheal.health. And through there, they can get set up and see us individually. We're going to start doing some classes. And we're just getting started out there working with people virtually.
So if somebody has problems sleeping, where do you guys go? I mean, obviously, if the person is talking about their relationship with their significant other and there's conflict or something, then you're looking at that. There's, or is there... here's how you sleep? Is there like an instruction that you give?
Well, there's good sleep height, but when someone's not, remember, sleeping is a natural. I mean, we all sleep. We should be able to sleep. So when you can't sleep, there's something preventing you from sleeping. People that don't sleep are people that are in high alert, or if you're worried about a threat or danger, you can't sleep. You're not supposed to sleep. So it's normal not to sleep. Now, if you can't sleep because there's a lot of noise or a lot of brightness, or you're using technology right before you go to bed, or you're drinking a lot of alcohol before you go, those are other things. So there's sleep hygiene. But for most people, The reason they're drinking at night is there's a dysregulation of the nervous system. They're trying to regulate, a need for regulation, calming of the nervous system. And that makes sense because that they sense something's off and they're trying to do the best they can. In fact, a lot of stress eating is around calming. Part of the vagus nerve that will affect your ability to regulate the nervous system innervates the throat and the muscles around there for chewing. So chewing and swallowing actually does stimulate and regulate the nervous system. In other words, there's a reason why people like to eat beyond just the calorie density of the food. That is regulatory. It's regulating. So we have to teach people how to regulate their nervous system to get out of fight or flight. Then that will lead us where to go next. But for most people, that's where we'll start.
So my favorite pillar might be the play one. So when does someone go to the doctor and he says, go play pickleball twice a week, or writes a prescription to run a marathon, or talk to me about play?
Well, it's interesting because play is one of those things that when we play, we can't be in that high alert or anxiety mode. And so it really stimulates quite the opposite of that sense of danger, that sense of safety and that creativity. It meets so many different needs that allow us to go to that state of rest and digest and thrive versus the fight or flight and, barely surviving.
And so many people forgot how to play. They don't prioritize play, or they think play is for children. But we can learn a lot from our children. There's a lot we need to play.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. I think of, the people, my son lives in Santa Monica. My kids all live in Santa Monica. And my son was running the other day and there was some homeless guy with a machete this was some months back, that was unvanished, just crazy. And he called the police and so on. He's been chased by someone trying to stab him. He's a quick, fast runner. And, he called the police and the police said,
really?
Yeah, the police said, did he stab you? No, he didn't. Okay, well, there's not much we can do. It's like, are you kidding me? What is going on there? I mean, we have this problem in Los Angeles. You guys moved away from California, you've moved back east over the last few years. What medically as a doctor what do you perceive when you look at a situation like that, where there's a lot of people? Is it just the, drug addicts, or is there some health issue there? How would you frame that in terms of what you do?
Yeah, it can be, there's a lot to unpack there, right? Because everybody has the same universal human needs, right? We all have the same needs to care for people. We all have the same needs for trust and safety and love and choice and autonomy, right? Food. So when somebody is doing something like that, they're disconnected from their needs. And there's a variety of reasons, at least their needs for care about other people and their need for interdependence. They're disconnected. And I think a lot of people today are not only disconnected from themselves and their needs, but they're disconnected from other people and being able to sense the impact of what that feels like when you're connected to someone versus when you're not, when you're caring to someone and when you're not. Or you have so much building up inside of you that all you're doing is expressing frustration and anger and trying to get some relief. And you don't even have time or capacity to care about other people's needs. So that's where we're at the end of our rope. And then you add in addiction, which again is trying to, usually from our experience, coping with pain and trying to deal with pain, life pain. And you put into that different mental health disorders and a lot of mental health. If you get to some of the core needs around feeling safe and secure, and their needs for safety and security and support and sort of this predictability frame, this secure is just not there. Right. And so when you start getting from a needs-based consciousness, you can unpack, wow, there's so many reasons why people are going down this route. And that's when people do something, they're just trying to meet needs the best they can in that moment. And unfortunately, they might not meet other needs in the moment. And when they're not aware of that, that can be very painful.
And just to take a step back, I think this is the value of nonviolent communication that Matt was mentioning, is really creating this needs-based consciousness around what we're feeling, what we're needing, and what those messages are as far as then impacting our behaviors or strategies. So when needs are met, we have pleasant feelings. And when needs are unmet, have unpleasant feelings. And so those are, that the frustration, anger, disappointment, those are messages that needs have gone unmet for a really long time, or have gone unmet. It doesn't even have to be a long time. But when our needs are met, we come from an expansive space where we're more willing and joyfully want to contribute to ourselves. So that's where we have the energy and the desire and the internal motivation to actually sustain and to make and sustain the changes that we desire, whether that's nutrition or exercise or better sleep or better connection with our family, and also with others, where we want to contribute. It's a natural desire to contribute to others. But when our needs go unmet, then we come from this restrictive, constricted, independent, not interdependent state, where a lot of our strategies become tragic, whether they're tragic for ourselves, like addiction, or they're tragic for others, like the horrifying situation that happened with your son.
And it's also how we're educated. A lot of people are unfortunately educated to be insensitive to other people's needs. I mean, they're not even conscious about needs in the first place. But if you're educated in a way that you're insensitive to other people's needs, or you're preoccupied with meeting your own needs, regardless of the impact on others, there's an education process that needs to happen too. So at the core, we know these universal human needs exist and they're true, but there's a lot of work to do, from what Alona talked about all the way through to just some education.
So you were saying that a common place that people start is in the sort of, they're maybe in the fight or flight. They're living too reactive to everything. When you kind of get past that point, what sort of things then are the next level, so to speak, if the main intake are people who are living in a totally stressed lifestyle where they're kind of not relaxing enough, or if at all. Once you kind of address that, what kind of things come up for people?
And usually so there's two parts to the first pillar of self. One is to regulate the nervous system, like you said, to get out of high alert, feel safe, so that then you can connect to what you're feeling and needing. And that's building a feelings and needs vocabulary and helping people understand that paradigm. And then through that, right, feelings will let you know whether your needs are being met or not. Unpleasant feelings mean you have needs that are unmet. Pleasant feelings mean you have needs that are being met, right? So, and then we say, okay, so what needs of yours are not being met right now? And it might be needs for meaning and purpose. It might be needs for rest. It might be needs for some relief around pain or some other disease process, right? It might be needs for just some fun and play and joy, right? So based on what's alive in that person, that's where we go next. But we can't even, you see what I'm saying? We have to sort of open up the shell and then get in there and then let them be our guide. And then we're going to help them along. And then eventually they get so skilled at this process that they don't need our help anymore.
And that's where life becomes expansive, right? So when you're in that fight or flight survival mode, you're kind of in that reactive hindbrain thinking, where it's instinct and reactivity and disconnection. And then in kind of getting to that regulation, it allows that expansiveness of I have options to even go to, And
there's a little bit of a lot of internal work, right? Because there's a lot of people that are by the time we meet them, they're really unhappy with their lives, right? They could be unhappy in their marriage. They could be unhappy with what's going on with the relationship with their children. They could be unhappy with their work. So they spend so many hours a day. They don't like where they're living. They're unhappy with politics. There's so many hours of the day where needs are not being met. Because remember, when you're unhappy, all it means is that you have needs that are not being met. So then it's, okay, well, so how can we start giving some attention to those needs? And then through there, we can start connecting to actions and strategies that can better meet those. But what's interesting is that you don't even have to meet those needs to start feeling relief and peace. Just connecting to your unmet needs starts to give you a sense of inner peace and hope and inspiration. Because otherwise people are feeling lost. Now they're like, okay, I got clarity. It's not, I don't know where I am. Like imagine being lost or having pain that you don't know where it's coming from versus, we're lost, but now I'm getting some directions and we're going to be able to figure this out. Or, now I have a diagnosis. So I get some relief from that. I start to get some comfort and safety in there, even though I'm still hurting.
So you talked about the importance of nonviolent communication, or learning about that and what that's done for you personally and professionally, using that as a tool, and that's a really interesting aspect. What in the book, in writing and creating the book, what was kind of the most fun or most interesting? What were you most excited about? Was there one area that you were more sort of excited to share than another?
I think for me, it's how it all pieces together. To see all the different pieces come together and actually achieve the results that we're looking for, to be able to know that there is an option where life can be wonderful, and what that means and what that could look like and what are the steps to get there, just feels really empowering, and it makes me happy, and to be able to share that with others even more so.
Yeah. And for me, I enjoy the chapter that we did, the new perspective on chronic disease. And it is so exciting for me as I'm continuing to just dig into the data on connection and how at below the subcellular level, there's all these changes that happen in your body in response to your environment and your physiological state of threat or safety. And it's so interesting, the cascade of events that happen that lead to all sorts of not only chronic disease, but simple things like, I'm going to feel more tired. I'm going to feel more fatigued. I mean, it's just so fascinating. So I have a lot of fun digging into that detail.
That's great. I really like how you have practical advice and guidelines, that you sort of break it down in the book. That's what makes it not woo-woo, because you sort of explain it and give tools that it's just not like, oh no, it's magical, only the doctor can do it. No, you can do it. And that's you've presented it in sort of a roadmap fashion, I guess I would call it. And so I'm going to recommend this book very highly. I'm going to put a link to it down in the description with this video where people can go get it. It's called Wellness to Wonderful. And, let's read it and make a wonderful life, I think is really the message here. It's such a different book than the ones that come out from all the, other plant-based people. And like, it's so different from the other books that you guys have written, which are, how to get results using diet, but you've just sort of expanded the universe in a way that I think will resonate with people too, whether they're plant-based or not. Just there's so many kind of interpersonal guidelines and useful stuff. So it's available.
One thing, Jeff,
go ahead.
One thing I think it's also important that people realize that we're on the path as well. Like there's no there to get to, right? It's about understanding the path, understanding the pillars, knowing when you're off the path, and then knowing how to get back on the path. And we had a humbling experience ourselves where we were off the path internally with our family and with our daughter, getting ill and having an autoimmune disease where she got Crohn's disease. And there was so much that we were, and I got her permission to be able to talk about this, and because she really wants to help people as well. And at first there's like this level of like embarrassment. And for me, I feel embarrassed and like, hey, I'm teaching this stuff and how my kids, what am I doing here? And then I look at, it was hard enough with our daughter not being just being plant-based, right? Being vegan, that we were lax on things like sugar and oil and processed foods, right? So she could fit in with her friends. There was a need for belonging, but it wasn't meeting needs for health. And once we got this experience, and then also there was issues with school. And we took her out of school and did homeschool, but then she was at home and out of her friends' environment. There was a lot of isolation, and she did stuff all virtually, which studies show do not impact the body and the health the same way as live interaction does. Right. So there was that. You take it when a kid, she's like, well, essentially meaning and purpose is another huge need, right? A lot of people meet needs for meaning and purpose of their work. For kids, it's their school, their activities. She didn't have that. She's like, well, so why am I getting up in the morning, essentially? So I have this there's a level of, like I said, some embarrassment, some guilt, some shame around, hey, look what I did to my daughter. And then the intensity, I come with intensity, that's going to help put her in high alert. So I'm sharing this vulnerably because we don't have it all figured out. But boy, let me tell you, once we found the problem, we knew exactly the path to get back on. We knew what to do. We jumped on it. And within weeks, she's feeling significantly better. Right. And she's, we have her in activities, and she came up to me the other day and she's like, Dad, she's in this theater camp. And she's like, Dad, I can't stop smiling. I got this solo and I can't stop smiling. I'm so happy, Dad. And I like almost got like teary, right? Because I'm like, it's such a transition. And it was like, because of the pillars, we were able to get back on track and very quickly do what we needed to do. It wasn't that we had it perfect. So I want to be the first one to say that I'm off the path quite often. And I know how to get back on it.
Life is a work in progress. Even for the best-selling authors, they're still learning too, right?
Yeah, but I think my daughters. I'm curious, Jeff. How is that to hear when I share that vulnerably? Like, what comes up?
I respect. What can I say? I know. I have friends. We all have friends, vegan doctors too, who we look up to, and so on. Everyone's got issues at different times in their own families, and so on. Which I'm not going to talk about someone else's stuff. But right. I mean, when Nina and Randa had this acne thing happen to them, and of course, your life is so interconnected. They've written the book about it. Of course, what happened there? They were on a standstill. They were very, antisocial and hermits because of this awful acne problem that they had when they hit about 20 years old. They thought they skated past it, and then ultimately, what really helped them a lot is that they tightened up their diet and had, a big kind of breakthrough, and that was wonderful. And they wrote a book about it. But I know the feeling of helplessness as a parent when your kids, and you're sending them to the dermatologist, you're sending them to the UCLA specialist, you're sending them everywhere. And, doesn't matter how much money you can spend on them, it's a rough feeling as a parent for anybody. But I'm glad that she has you guys as her parents, because it sounds like, his life is not the absence of problems. It's the, dealing with problems. That's the skill you need to learn, because they're always going to throw you a curve at one time or another. But no, I think that's really interesting. How old is she?
She's 11.
11. Okay.
And part of our, me, because there's a part of me that instinctively wants to hide in my vulnerability. But then I always, there's a feeling like you can feel it tearing me up inside. Right. And when I share it, even though it feels a little bit uncomfortable because I might worry about a need for acceptance. Right. There's a relief in my body of sharing it. And to me, that's what we're talking about when we talk about suppression and repression, that there's actually it affects my physical health to not be connected to those feelings or to hold them alone and keep them suppressed. So it's not only, maybe helpful to other people, it's physically helpful to me. And I think that's a perfect example of that phenomenon.
At the same time that it was extremely humbling, the other side of that was, and that to me is also the magic of nonviolent communication and that needs-based consciousness, is what it builds in connection is a huge amount of trust. And so once she got the diagnosis, coming back together as a family and kind of setting our new normal and what goals we're going to, how we're going to move forward, there was an immediate partnership with her, which is why she's successful right now and why the changes that she's seeing, are so dramatic, because she just jumped in.
she just completely trusted. She jumped in. I couldn't believe how easy it was. She's like, whatever you guys tell me to do, I'm going to do it. Because we always are collaborative as parenting style, right? And we get everybody's needs matter, and she has that trust that her needs matter. So it was, but now she's like, I feel so good. Her energy is through the roof again.
In fact, she's seeing so many benefits. So we had a trip overseas planned Monday. Matt and Jordan are still going. And Kylie chose to go to True North because she still has work to do in the world of fruits and vegetables. And so she chose to go to True North to hone and optimize that.
That's amazing. Well, thank you for sharing that. And thank you guys very much for joining me today. The book is available on paperback, right? Kindle. Didn't you make an Audible version?
Yeah.
So I'm going to link to that below. And thank you, audience, for tuning in. Please give this video a like and share it for everyone else to find. We'll see you on the next one. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Jeff.